Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session, Tengami, the Art of a Folding World. Before we start the session, I was told to remind everybody to turn off electronic devices like mobile phones, because this is recorded. And once the session starts, if you all slot in a little bit in the center of each row, then it will be easier for people who are late to fit in. So at first, let me tell you a little bit of what the session is going to be about. So the session is called Tengami, the Art of a Folding World, because Tengami is a game that is set inside an authentically folding pop-up book or flip book. And a lot of people know Tengami for its unique and distinctive art style, but actually not many people are aware how complex and difficult the technology is that powers this game. And so in this talk, I want to give a closer look at the tools that we use to create digital pop-ups and show how this impacts the aesthetic. The talk, however, is not going to be an art direction talk. So first off, let me do the introduction. My name is Jennifer Schneidereit. I am a programmer and game designer, and on this slide you can see the games I've worked on. I began my career in games working for a Japanese developer called Acquire, and after a few years moved to the UK to work at Rare on Kinect Sports. At Rare, I met Phil and Rio, and sometime later we founded Yum Yum. We are a 3-person multinational studio in the UK, and Tengami is our first game together. I think that not everybody here in this room will know what Tengami is, so let me give you a quick overview. So Tengami is an atmospheric adventure game, and it takes place inside a Japanese pop-up book. At their own pace, players explore a beautiful paper landscape and solve very simple puzzles by flipping and folding parts of the pop-up book. The game was developed with touch controls in mind and launched last year on iOS, but has since been also released on the Wii U, PC, and Mac. As probably, like I said earlier, haven't seen the game, I want to show next a trailer so you know what the aesthetic is like and how some of the gameplay works. So let's see if we have some sound, because this was a trouble. Okay, so next I want to go back to the very beginning when we started to think about making a game inside a pop-up book. And very early on in those days, we decided that we wanted to work within the constraints of an authentically folding pop-up book. And this was mainly for game design reasons, because whenever we looked at movies or apps that had elements of pop-up books, it was always extremely obvious to us that the folding was fake. And that took away from what we really loved as pop-up books as children, which is this kind of sense of wonder that you have when you fold the page and see something as ordinary as paper unfold into something unexpected and beautiful. But also because the game was, because we designed the game for touch, we felt that it would take away from the tactility when you interact with this folding world. And a lot of people have actually said to me, when they played the game, that they felt like it was a real pop-up book. And this is because it actually is a real pop-up book. So our goal was that everything in the game world should be recreatable with paper, glue, and scissors, And here on this slide, you can actually see that it is possible. Because the image that you see on the left-hand side, the paper pop-up book, was built based on the model that you see on the right-hand side. And we basically showed the image on the right-hand side to a pop-up book artist, and we said to her, can you recreate this scene in exactly the same way with paper? And she could. So the big challenge with that was, though, at the beginning, that we had no idea whatsoever how to make pop-up books. Like, for example, I hadn't done any significant paper crafting since kindergarten. And how do you even go about making digital pop-up books, like for use in a video game? Like, we tried to find commercially available software that is kind of like a pop-up book editor, but we soon discovered that this kind of thing doesn't exist. All of this was further complicated by the fact that we were only 3 people and none of us was an animator. So we instantly knew that hand animating the pop-ups wouldn't be impossible and that we had to come up with some kind of fully automated solution. So we decided to split the labor. I was assigned to become an expert in paper crafting, and these are some of the things that I built. And this was mostly to allow us to answer questions that we had around the world construction. Like, for example, how do you even go about building a folding castle or a folding Japanese shrine? And how do you construct a pop-up book for use in a video game? So for more than 2 months, I just basically built schematic after schematic that I could find on the internet by hand until I finally had an understanding of how to express myself creatively, like with this medium. And once this happened, I actually stopped working with paper, because once you make a tiny mistake in the paper crafting, the entire construction doesn't fold anymore, and you have to start from scratch. It's very error-prone and a very slow process. So what I did first was that I began to mock up 3D models in Blender. And this is one of the examples of that. So what you see here is just a 3D model. It doesn't fold, it doesn't animate, but it could be recreated in such a way with paper, scissor, and glue. And this was very useful for figuring out some of our initial questions about the level design and the world construction, but unfortunately, it wasn't helpful at all for establishing the art direction, which we had begun to look into. And one of the reasons for this was, of course, that it wasn't possible to see the world in movement. Because this is really, what is so special about the pop-up book or the pop-up book world, that the world can move and animate at any moment in time. And these are some of the images that he initially created, some of the concept arts. And I absolutely love these images, and everybody on the team did. But what happened, and I think a lot of developers in this room have experienced the same problem, is that when you love something as a 2-dimensional image, like once you transfer it into a 3-dimensional environment, it loses a lot of its impact. So we knew that we needed to kind of basically go further with the technology if we want to establish an art direction. Phil was assigned the hard part, and he basically had to figure out a way how we could digitally create pop-ups. This took him in total 1 year, and only really fell into place when we found a book called Pop-Up Design and Paper Mechanics by Duncan Birmingham. It's a book that you see on this slide, and Duncan Birmingham, I think, is the only pop-up professor in the world. He works in the UK, and yes, we visited him. And his book is excellent. It's very easy to understand and has a very systematic approach to making pop-ups. It also has the added benefits of explaining some of the basic mathematics behind it, and it's a lot of trigonometry. I'm not going to show mathematics formula in this slide, but it's quite interesting and quite complicated. So Phil used this book as a basic for our pop-up editor and how to figure out how we can mathematically calculate paper folding. And the tool that he created is what we simply call the paper kit. The paper kit, this is a screenshot here, is a plugin for a 3D modeling tool called Modo, more specifically for Modo 501. It's the only version of Modo that we support. And it's a set of Python scripts that allow for a variety of folds or paper shapes to be attached to one another to form complex and intricate folding structure. When the model is exported, the paper kit mathematically calculates the folding as an animation for use in the game. So in the game, everything that you see is an animation. This process is just like we wanted, fully automated. None of the pop-ups in Tengami are hand-animated and are all calculated based on the mathematical model that Phil developed. And the way that you work in the paper kit is very similar to working with a Lego kit. I want to show this in more detail now. So imagine that you have a set of Lego shapes or Lego blocks. In the paper kit, we call these foundation shapes. Or sometimes I will also refer to them as fold types. Foundation shapes can be like Lego blocks connected to each other. So in the image that you see on the left-hand side, you see the supported foundation shapes in the paper kit. There's a plane fold, a parallelogram, a box, a pyramid. And in the image on the right, you can see connections or operations that can be performed between these foundation shapes. So let's do it like a simple example. If I wanted to build a folding house, then what I would do is I'd select here the box shape, and I will create it in the editor, and then I will create a pyramid shape, and I will attach the pyramid on top of the box. And this creates an approximation of a house, something that looks close enough. And what you need to know is every pop-up starts with a plane fold. The plane fold is like the first structure at the top. And more folds are attached to it, basically to create more complex structures. So it's quite important to note that the paper kit does not actually test whether the shape combinations that you do are valid. So the person that uses this tool needs to know very intimately the books that I showed you earlier and make sure that they follow all of the rules. Because if you don't do so, you will just end up with a completely unfoldable mess. And I want to show you now how we would construct something in the paper kit by looking at the most fundamental and basic fold type of foundation shape, which is the parallelogram. And I will try to play this video. And it's a short video. I'll just play it 2 or 3 times so that you can see what we are going to construct. Okay. I'll try to use a paper prop now. So what you see here is the base card. I like to call this the base card, or the plane fold. And the plane fold has a plane left and a plane right. And in the center, the green line is what we call a gully. And everything that you do in the paper kit is very analog to the way that you would create paper pop-ups. So what you are learning here now, if you go back home, you can probably start building your own pop-ups with paper. And so this is basically, if you just took a piece of paper and you fold the paper in the center, then you create a left plane and a right paper plane. And the center of the crease is what is the gully. And this is very important because the gully is where you raise your paper planes. So the card that we actually see here is called a 180-degree base plane because the angle between the left and the right paper plane is 180 degrees. And it means that when the card is 180 degrees open, the paper structure will be completely raised or erect. And if the degree between the angle becomes 0, then the paper structures basically will be folded completely flat. You might think that, now that I just showed this, that every pop-up has to be based on a 180-degree plane fold, but that is not the case. You can decide in the paper kit that the open state or the raised state of the paper planes is any kind of angle. And when I speak of, okay, so this is a little folded. Let's look now what happens here when we have our parallelogram. So the dark gray structure is a parallelogram or the P-fold. And you see this kind of pink marker, and the pink marker is what we call an attacher. And the attacher belongs to the P-fold or parallelogram. And the way that it works is, in the paper kit, I would say, I want to create a parallelogram. I will select the attacher of this parallelogram, and I will select the gully, the green marker, and I will say, attach this parallelogram to the gully. And the paper kit will then raise the paper planes across the Scully for me. The dark red markers that you see are glue flaps. So, like, I prepared this earlier in the hotel room. Like, if you just take like a piece of paper, again, you fold it in the center, and then I do 2 more folds. Then these 2 little folds are my glue flaps. And if I did this in paper, then I would put it like this, and the glue flaps, this way I would stick them on the paper. And in Tengami, we do not show these glue flaps for aesthetic reasons, but they are extremely important because I hope that you noticed that where we glued the parallelogram to the base card, we created more gullies. And if you think about making pop-ups, you should essentially think of it as a game of working from one base gully and creating more and more gullies in order to allow you to create the structure that you are after. So I'm going to show this process now in the paper kit. I'll try to pause the video, I'll show the video a couple of times so that you can see it. So what's happening in the beginning is that you can see that the plane fold is being selected. And when that happens is it says, okay, create plane fold. And I can now specify the angle between the planes. This is what I talked about. In our example, we had a 180-degree plane fold. And here now I'm going to build a 90-degree plane fold, which is a plane fold that looks like this. And I think a lot of people will know this from greeting cards, like birthday cards or Christmas cards. They often use the 90-degree plane fold. And I can do various other that are not very important now. So I'm creating this. I'll just say, okay, this is what I want. It puts it there in the center of the scene. And now I say, okay, I want to create a parallelogram. And the parallelogram, once I hit the OK button, will be flat folded in the center of the model. And now I'm selecting the parallelogram, and what is here orange is the attacher, and the selected state is orange. And now I'm selecting this green marker, which is the gully that we talked about, and I say attach, and it will immediately raise the paper plane across the gully, and I can now instantly see how this would fold in the game. I'll play it once more so you can see it. Okay. So here's I created a structure where I layered 2 more parallelograms in front of the one that I just created. And let's have a look at what the artist is actually doing now. So the artist can edit all of the paper planes in the same way that, again, you would do with paper pop-ups by cutting shapes into it. So Ria uses the pen tool a lot. It's noteworthy, though, that under no circumstances can the thickness of the paper planes be changed. Because the moment that you change the thickness of the paper planes, you will cause intersections when you start them to fold down. Because pop-ups, like I said earlier, it's very intricate, and you need to be extremely accurate with all of the calculations, or it just doesn't work. So this scene's something that I did very early on in the project, one of the earliest scenes that I created in our paper kit. And I gave these to Rio, our artist, to explain to him what he can do with the structures that I give him. And you see here on the one side the front-facing surfaces that are marked green. And you can see that you can cut shapes into them, whatever you want. You can cut holes into them. You can just shape the edges. You can also extend in width and height. And in the same way, on the other image, where we have the top-facing surfaces that are marked blue, I can cut shapes into them, and I can extend those in X and Z in this case. And so this is a little bit more like an advanced scene. And the way that we work is that I will, as a level designer, I will always build the basic pop-up structure. And I will basically have an image in my mind of what I want this final scene to look like. And I will place folds accordingly. And every fold that you see in Tengami in any given scene is very purposefully placed, and with a very specific meaning in mind. And Rio will then take these structures, and I will explain to him the kind of gameplay that is happening here, or the kind of atmosphere that I want to create, and what kind of scene I envision. And then he will transform what is, rather abstract looking and could be any number of things on the left-hand side to this kind of Japanese forest scene that you see on the right-hand side with the red gate. And maybe some of you noticed this, and working this way is actually a little bit similar to the way that a 3D character creation works in video games. So in the case of Tengami, it's basically what I, the level designer or pop-up designer, is doing. It's like I'm building an animation skeleton, and I will give this skeleton to the artist to model on top. Whereas if you do characters, like you will always, of course, like do the modeling first, geometry first, and then create the skeleton. Using this kind of approach is very restrictive for the artist, and it requires a lot of back and forth between the disciplines to come up with something that will eventually, work for gameplay, but also look good. So for the end of the presentation, I just want to show you 2 more videos, which will basically show some of the basic structures that I give Rio, and then what kind of scene he transforms these into. This is the scene with the red gate that I've shown several times throughout this presentation. And you can see the green markers where the gullies are. And this is then after he shaped it and then added the textures. The next scene I haven't shown in the presentation, but if you've played the game, then maybe you can try to figure out what scene this is going to transform into. If you guess that it's a scene from the beginning of the game with the Howling Wolf, then you were right. So in Tengami, a lot of the game is constructed based on this simple parallelogram. So now you can go and make your own pop-up book game. But we also have a lot of kind of building-based or architectural structures in the game. And all of these structures are a lot more complicated than what I can show in this kind of session, because they use some of the more advanced foundation shapes that you saw earlier.
We're out of time.
But I'm only at 23 minutes, and the talk is 25.
It ends
Well, thanks for listening anyways. Thanks for coming to my presentation. This is my email address. And if you want to email me, I'm also on Twitter. And if you want to talk to me, we can do, I think, Q&A in the wrap-up room. Thank you very much.